evening, ladies and gentlemen. It gives us great pleasure to have you all with us this evening for this wonderful session with the Chief Economic Advisor, Dr. V. Anantha Nageswaran. I would request all of you to settle down, please. We will begin the event now with the welcome note by President MCCA, Mr. Ram Kumar Shankar. But before I invite him, I would request all of you to keep your mobile phones on silent mode, please. Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Ram Kumar.
Distinguished guests, respected members of the Chamber, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It is my privilege and honor to extend a very warm and special welcome to our Chief Guest, Dr. V. Anantha Nageswaran, Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India. Sir, we are deeply honored by your presence here this evening and very grateful that you've joined us for this very important interaction at what is a very crucial time in this entire world. I also extend a warm welcome to Mr. Raghuveer Srinivasan, editor of the Hindu Business Line, who will be in conversation with Dr. Nageswaran later in this session. It is equally my pleasure to welcome all our distinguished guests, senior industry leaders, special invitees, members of the Chamber, including past presidents, members of the Governing Council and the expert committees, and friends of the Chamber. Your presence and continued engagement are the strength of this institution, and we deeply value your support. A special welcome to the consuls of different countries. Some of them are here and some others are expected a little later, and we welcome all of them. Today's program is particularly significant due to the presence of Dr. V. Anantha Nageswaran, an eminent economist, a distinguished public intellectual, and a key voice shaping India's economic narrative in these dynamic times. An accomplished academic and thought leader, Dr. Nageswaran has a resume that will give all of us a big complex. He has had a glittering career spanning industry, academia, and government. An MBA from IIM Ahmedabad, Dr. Nageswaran earned a doctorate in finance, specializing in exchange rate behavior from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Between 1994 and 2011, he gained extensive international experience working on macroeconomic and financial market research with leading financial institutions in Switzerland and Singapore. In the world of academia, he has been associated with many universities around the world in different roles. He has co-authored several books on derivatives, global finance, and the Indian economy. He was appointed Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India in January 2022, and the economic surveys crafted by him have received universal praise for their lucidity, academic rigor, and data-driven analysis, and for shifting the focus from short-term fiscal fixes to a long-term structural approach. Dr. Nageswaran is no stranger to the Madras Chamber. We have had the privilege of hosting him on earlier occasions as well, and each interaction has been immensely enriching, offering our members valuable perspectives grounded in both academic depth and practical policy insight. His continued association with the Chamber reflects the importance of sustained dialogue between policymakers and industry. The Madras Chamber, as many of you present here today are aware, has been a part of India's, and in particular, Tamil Nadu's economic and industrial journey for nearly 190 years. The Chamber has a multi-pronged focus, acting as a vital bridge between the corporate world and policymakers, acting as an ambassador for industrial development in the state of Tamil Nadu, being the port of first call for international delegations from other countries interested in investing in the state, the dissemination of information to members and the general public on topics of interest, as also provision of value-added services like arbitration and certificates of origin to members and others. The Chamber has at many times brought out white papers on topics of relevance to policymakers on subjects as varied as the fintech industry, industrial estates, and aviation infrastructure, to mention a few, thus reinforcing its commitment to active participation in improving the general business environment in the state. Today, we meet at a time when the global economic environment is witnessing significant turmoil. Geopolitical developments, supply chain realignments, technological shifts, and evolving trade dynamics are creating both challenges and opportunities. In this context, the theme of today's session, turning compulsions into strategic resilience and amid geopolitical churn, is extremely relevant. For India, this is truly a defining moment. Even as we navigate this geopolitical churn, India's internal story remains to be one of immense promise. We are a consumption-driven economy with a young aspirational population with a median age of just 29 years, a working age population of around 1 billion, and a fertility rate that is still close to the replacement rate. India is on track to become the world's third largest consumer market by 2026, driven by an ever-expanding middle class and a digital revolution where UPI transactions have, in February 26, reached 22.6 billion. India is thus in a very sweet spot. As global supply chains diversify and economies seek trusted allies, India is increasingly seen as a reliable and competitive partner. Our emphasis on macroeconomic stability and robust domestic demand provides resilience amid global uncertainty. However, it is not a bed of roses. We also face our share of challenges. Geopolitical events and changing trade policies around the world are posing significant threats to supply chains. Recent geopolitical events have demonstrated how risky it is for us, and indeed any country, to be over-dependent on other countries or regions for feedstock. Trade policies are also changing. Increasingly, tariffs are being weaponized as countries look inward to build capacity and self-sufficiency. India cannot afford to ignore this trend. We too would need to build domestic capacity and reduce dependence on other countries. Our government has been proactive in this. The introduction of initiatives such as Make in India, PLI, the emphasis on encouraging investment in infrastructure and digital public goods are all examples of prescient and sagacious action. There is, however, still some way to go in this journey to reduce dependency and build self-sufficiency. As they say, by definition, what is good can always be better. Industry has a huge role to play in this. The opportunity before Indian industry is clear: to scale up, to enhance competitiveness, and to achieve a balanced integration with global value chains with an inbuilt agility to navigate disruptions of the kind that we are witnessing today. It is in this context that insights from policymakers assume great significance, and we are indeed fortunate to have with us Dr. Anantha Nageswaran, who in his address will help us better understand how India can convert these global compulsions into strategic resilience. Following his address, we will have a special fireside chat with Dr. Anantha Nageswaran, led by Mr. Raghuveer Srinivasan, editor of the Hindu Business Line. With Raghuveer's deep understanding of economic and business issues and his sharp journalistic perspective, we are confident that this conversation will further enrich our understanding of the topic of the day and help get the best from Dr. Anantha Nageswaran. Post this conversation, we hope to have some time for an open house interaction with the audience. With these words, I once again welcome you all to this very special function this evening, and on behalf of all of you, it is my privilege to invite Dr. Anantha Nageswaran to deliver his address. Thank you very much. Please get this going. I'll just okay.
Thank you, President Ramkumar of the Madras Chamber of Commerce and Industry, for your gracious and generous welcome remarks. Thanks once again to you and to other office bearers of MCCI for inviting me to share my thoughts on India's strategic priorities amid the geopolitical churn. How do we turn the compulsions into convictions and opportunities? And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being present here. So over the next 30 minutes, I'll share with you my perspectives on how the West Asian conflict is impacting and will impact India this financial year. How did we enter the new financial year? With what kind of macroeconomic backdrop? How is the global political configuration changing? And deal with few of India's important challenges. I would like to remind you that obviously in the limited time, I may not be addressing all the challenges that India faces. There are numerous, but the key ones as I see them will be the ones I will take up for some examination, followed by a conversation with my good friend, Mr. Raghuveer Srinivasan. So, we all know that post-COVID, India has been one of the world's macroeconomic success story. We have achieved 7% plus real GDP growth with declining inflation and improving fiscal situation, public finances, a reorientation of India's public expenditure from revenue to capital, creating infrastructure, including digital ones, and at the same time, with a financial system that has been nursed back to health after the wobbles of the second decade, ample foreign exchange reserves, low external debt, etc. While bulk of it is due to policy actions, it's equally true that the price of crude oil also played a big part in guiding and shaping these favorable macroeconomic outcomes in the country post-COVID. Barring the slight blip we see in 2022 due to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, overall the price of crude oil has been on a declining trend in India for quite some time. But now that's been reversed. In other words, the point I want to leave with you on this slide is that the price of crude oil does play a very important part in imparting macroeconomic resilience and favorable performance, and that has shifted on account of this conflict. So that is the important shift that we need to notice and acknowledge. And you can see here in terms of the key prices, whether it is gasoline in the US, crude futures contracts, Middle East, butane, propane, etc., which go into the making of cooking gas, urea, the fertilizer prices, how much they have shifted since the conflict began, and what is the year-on-year change globally. These are global prices, not necessarily related to India, but obviously when we import them, we pay these prices. So there is a huge energy price ticker shock, as we call them, but obviously it is also combined with supply disruptions. India's import dependence on many of this is quite stark and high. Crude oil at 87%, more than half of it coming through the Strait of Hormuz. LPG, while it is 60% import dependence, 90% of that comes through the strait. Natural gas, ammonia, sulfur, the table on your left is self-explanatory. So, and more importantly, Gulf countries account for 38% of India's annual remittances. So this conflict, ongoing conflict in the Persian Gulf, regardless of there being a ceasefire at the moment as we speak, this crisis affects India through 4 channels. One is the energy complex, because I don't want you to think of it only as a crude oil price shock. It is oil, natural gas, petrochemicals, fertilizer, etc. It is a price and supply shock, both happening at the same time. It is not merely the case that global demand is surging, but supply is there. You simply have to pay a higher price here. Even if you are willing to pay a higher price, it may not be available at the quantities and at the time you want. So there is a price and supply shock for energy commodities, not just crude oil. And it's also other commodities, but more importantly, it's about trade as well. As energy prices rise and supplies are scarce, global growth and global trade will naturally be affected. As global economic activity shifts down, India's exports will also take a beating. We have to wait and see what that magnitude will be. And imports are also, and exports to Gulf countries are also impacted because Gulf economic activity is obviously under some strain. So it is an energy complex shock, it is a trade shock, and it is a logistics price shock. Freight and insurance costs have gone up since the conflict broke out, and I don't think they will come back in the near future to the levels we saw before the conflict began, because in general, prices of services and goods are usually upward sticky. They don't come down that easily, because the sense of uncertainty still remains. That is why it's very important not to equate the end of the conflict, and we have a ceasefire right now, with the end of the contest itself. The contest, the strategic contest, is still open. As long as the contest remains open, the freight and insurance costs will remain elevated. And the fourth channel through which India is impacted is the remittance channel. $120 billion is our annual remittances coming from Indians located overseas. 80 billion are worker remittances, of which 30 to 40 billion come from the Gulf region. So 26-27, therefore, India faces these four major shocks to the macroeconomic performance, which was coasting along. In fact, I look back nostalgically to the evening of February 27th, which is a Friday. And I was hosting a joint press conference with Secretary Ministry of Statistics, Dr. Saurabh Garg, unwrapping the new GDP methodology with the new base year, etc., and very confidently asserting that the India's real GDP growth forecast, which we had pegged at 6.8 to 7.2% for FY27, I said I was now revising it to a number between 7 and 7.4. It doesn't seem like a big shift from 6.8 to 7.2 range. I was raising the range to 7 to 7.4. But what is important was I was taking out the 6 handle in front of the decimal point. So I was saying that real GDP growth will be at least 7%, if not higher. But that was February 27th, and February 28th morning, the conflict broke out. So that feels like eons ago when I was confidently predicting a 7+% real GDP growth. And I just saw before coming here in the evening, Business Standard, I was featuring a headline that Ernst Young is saying that if oil goes to $120 per barrel, India's real GDP will come down to 6%. If oil rules on average at $120 per barrel, India's landed price of crude, I will gladly take 6% real GDP growth. So if that is the case. But that is where we are. And India's landed price of crude, that is why I showed you the very first chart, the crude oil price. India's landed cost of crude was $113 per barrel in March, after being at below 70 or even below 60 at one point in December 2025. And then in the month of April, which is ending tomorrow, the average price has been 114. So it is a fairly significant jump in the price of crude oil. But we have a better starting point compared to many other nations. Notwithstanding the significant impact we are facing, it is important to place it in the global context, in the emerging market context. India is doing well. As I mentioned at the very beginning, in the last 6 years, we have managed to bring down the fiscal deficit from 9.2 to 4.4, and we budgeted 4.3 for this year. Of course, that number will naturally be higher in the light of what is unfolding right now. And the primary deficit, which is revenue deficit minus interest payments, came down from 5.7% in the COVID year down to just 0.7% budgeted for this year. So there has been clearly a great performance with respect to fiscal consolidation by the union government, and this naturally earned us 3 credit rating upgrades in the course of FY 25-26 last year. S&P, R&I Investment in Japan, Morningstar DBRS from the US. These were the 3 agencies that gave us a credit rating upgrade in the course of last year, from BBB minus to BBB in the case of S&P, in the case of other 2 agencies from BBB to BBB plus. Now the important thing is this fiscal consolidation did not hold India back from spending where it needed to spend. The capital expenditure, which was barely 5.3 trillion rupees in FY20, had gone up to 17.1 trillion or 17.1 lakh crore in FY27 budgeted, which is a rise of more than 3x. So the kind of numbers which I will show you in terms of infrastructure accomplishments has been made possible because along with fiscal consolidation, we reoriented the quality of expenditure from revenue to capital. The ratio was 88 to 12, revenue versus capital. That became 78 versus 22 in the recent budget. So the capital expenditure share has gone up by 10 percentage points compared to revenue expenditure. So that we could do so while doing fiscal consolidation is indeed creditable. And these are the kind of outcomes we have seen. Public-private partnership from 9,000 crores to 1.05 lakh crores. The highway length from 550 kilometers to national highways to 5,300 high-speed corridors in particular. Average commissioning of railway network more than doubling from 1,500 to 3,100. Port infrastructure expansion also doubling or in many cases going up by 60 to 70%. And what is interesting and gratifying to me when I was writing the economic survey was a chart at the bottom right. India's inland water transport freight movement was only 18 million metric tons back in 2013-14. Now it is 146 million metric tons, a compounded annual growth rate of 21% per annum in the last 11 years. So that is, if we have been able to achieve 7% plus real GDP growth with declining inflation, it is not just the food prices that contributed. It is the fact that India's supply rigidities and deficiencies have been considerably addressed in the last 6 years, and we have to acknowledge that. And in the budget that was unveiled on February 1st, the government also has created a lot of platforms for advanced manufacturing, announcing the rare earth corridor, including processing capabilities, because India too has rare earths of rare earth deposits. But what India lacks and what the world lacks is processing capacity, which is concentrated in one country, which you know what it is. And India has also become a member of the Pax Silica framework, which will ensure availability of semiconductor chips and also make sure that there is no single importer dependence on concentration risk. This is in spite of the ongoing trade-related uncertainties with the United States. India has been made a member of the Pax Silica framework. The East-West Freight Corridor to back up the North-South Corridor. And we have also announced the high-speed train corridor, which is currently only between Ahmedabad and Mumbai, which is under construction. Now, the important thing about the high-speed train corridors is they create the engineering ecosystem. It is not just about, these are all not white elephants, but they are investments in long-term manufacturing capabilities. And at the same time, while this government was criticized by many people in the past for, sort of becoming somewhat protectionist in nature, but that complaint or allegation has been effectively dispelled with the multiple free trade agreements that the government has signed in the last few years with UAE, Australia, UK, European Union, the investment agreement with EFTA, and now the latest one with New Zealand. So, and the agreement with Australia is going to be, broadened into a comprehensive economic partnership agreement, and there are conversations going on with Canada, etc. The UK agreement will become effective as of next month, I hope, and the European Union is working very hard to get the European Parliament's consent to make it operational before the calendar year is over. Now, these agreements not only open their markets for India's export of goods and services, both labor-oriented manufactured goods and services, they also expose Indian industries to import competition by lowering the import duties. That's very important. Because one of the banes of having a large domestic market is that the industry is quite comfortable protecting the domestic market tough because it is a huge marketplace. But at the same time, the fact that India runs a $333 billion trade deficit, which is the number for FY26, and on a GDP size of 3.9 trillion, that's 8.5% of GDP, shows that we haven't done enough in terms of developing our manufacturing capabilities. And I'm glad that President Ramkumar said in his initial address that industry too has a part to play. And one of the important parts that the industry has to play is to be prepared to face and welcome competition from imports. That is the good thing that Northeast Asia did compared to Southeast Asia, or for that matter, of course, South Asia, including India, which is to make their industries export competitive. Without that, we are not going to be able to get the kind of currency stability that we want and we deserve. So we wrote about it extensively in the economic survey. Manufacturing prowess matters. Today, if you look at currencies which are stable, the countries that you associate with stable currencies have manufacturing niche. Switzerland, Germany, of course, pre-Euro, Sweden, the Netherlands, China, Japan, Singapore, these are the countries you associate with strong and stable currencies, and what distinguishes them from the rest is their manufacturing capabilities. And that doesn't come without being exposed to competition and therefore investing in R&D, etc. Therefore, these free trade agreements are not therefore only about export access, but also making the Indian industry shape up to become export engines. And India's IT sector, I will talk about the impact of AI, but important to remember that it is not only about back office operations, it is now becoming the global nerve center for 1,800 companies, mainly from the US. The export revenue is $65 billion, heading towards 80, and employs about 1.9 million people. I understand that 45 to 50% of the GCC exports are also commoditized exports, but there is a 50% important value addition that happens from Indian GCCs, and that provides a crucial outlet or a sort of a safety wall for the potential dislocation that AI may cause to the basic IT-enabled services industries. I will talk about that a bit later. So, I don't want to belabor the bullet points in this slide. A quick glance at it will tell you exactly what it means. It simply shows that we have 45% of the world's GCC talent, and the economic impact is what I showed you in the previous slide, and therefore it is creating a deep knowledge density. So it is a silver lining, while there is considerable uncertainty, as we might have read based on the quarterly results of the 5 or 6 IT majors in the last few weeks. Apart from these accomplishments, post-2024 elections, and partly in response to the trade uncertainties that the United States created for us, the government has undertaken comprehensive reforms. While all of us are familiar with the reduction in the direct tax rates announced in February 2025 budget, and then the GST 2.0 in September 2025, and the trade agreement, which I spoke about a few minutes earlier, these are all things that we are familiar with. But what is important that I want you to take note of are the important process reforms. Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, making pollution norms proportional to the polluting intensity rather than being omnibus. Defense procurement reforms. Second one. The third one, Ministry of Road Transport and Highways, not just going by low-cost bidding, but incorporating technical parameters, is not just L1 anymore. That is important. So these process reforms are equally important in terms of lifting India's trend growth rate. And of course, the Indian electricity distribution companies achieved profitability in the aggregate in FY25, partly due to many of the silent reforms like smart metering and revamped distribution systems that were happening in the state distribution companies as well. The R&D ecosystem, and that is where I want the industry to take note, the government has committed 1.5 lakh crores or 1.5 trillion rupees to 2 funds. The Anusandhan National Research Fund, ANRF, and the Research and Development Innovation Fund. They are taking shape as we speak, and these will support both basic technology research and also commercializable research. ANRF is for basic research and RDIF is for deep tech and commercializable research. It is up to the industry also to play its part by coming forward not only with ideas that will be supported by funding, but also in leveraging the government's budgetary resources with their own resources and making these funds much larger in scope. Many of us know that India's R&D spend is one of the lowest in the world, and unfortunately the bulk of it comes only from the public sector. So the Indian private sector's commitment to R&D and innovation is something that is crucial to competitiveness along with exposure to competition. Both go together, and that is where the industry has to sort of read the tea leaves and respond accordingly. The last bit of reforms that I want to talk about is the state level deregulation, which most people don't know about, but we have covered in the economic survey. Under the leadership of the Cabinet Secretary since January 2025, we identified 23 key areas across 5 sectors where states can eliminate, simplify, consolidate rules and regulations or allow third-party certification, etc. The good news is the states took them up with great enthusiasm, and the success rate is close to 85 to 90% as I speak. So the point about all these slides is this. We are confronting the 26-27, the macroeconomic shock coming from the West Asia crisis from a position of macroeconomic resilience and strength backed by performance, infrastructure investments, trade agreements, and economic reforms, both product and process reforms at the union level and at the state government level. So regardless of the kind of shocks that I mentioned, 4 shocks, we are facing them from a position of macroeconomic solidity and not vulnerability. At the same time, we have to acknowledge that the period that prevailed between 1980 and 2015 is now over. The world has changed, and it will be continuing to undergo a churn and change over the next 20 years. What kind of new world order emerges, whether it does so at the end of 2035 or 2045, I don't know. But the truth is, both US and China are bifurcating the global order into rival technological, financial, and security architecture. And on top of that, we all know that the Richard Landau, who came from the US for the Raisina dialogue in February, clearly said that they don't want to make the same mistake they made with China, with India, allowing it to rise so that later on it becomes a formidable competitor. So the kind of support or strategic cooperation that one could expect from the United States, he clearly circumscribed it in his remarks in the Raisina dialogue. And then, of course, now we are awaiting the May 2026 summit between President Xi and President Trump. We do not know what kind of strategic accommodation that may happen between the two countries. And India normally stands to lose if there is a huge Cold War between them, because our geography will make it uncomfortable for us. At the same time, if they enter into a strategic accommodation, that will also place India in a position of vulnerability. So that is on the G2 consolidation. We need to wait and see what happens on the in mid-May. And clearly, in the light of the ongoing West Asia conflict, we have seen that G7 as a coherent bloc is over. It is not going to be put back that easily. Europe is diverging from US on trade matters, defense burden sharing, and of course on Ukraine as well. The rules-based international order is now invoked selectively by all parties. But I would say that it is not a question of now. It has always been the case that it is selectively invoked. And it will be even more so. So this rule-based international order is now over. Whatever that rule was, which got framed at the end of World War II by the victors, and they basically made the rules for the international order that suited their interest. But whether we like it or not, whether we agree or not, it provided a certain framework. It might have disadvantaged emerging economies and global developing countries like us, but it provided a framework with which you can argue. But that framework is now over, and we are therefore in the interim phase between two equilibrium. The new equilibrium hasn't yet emerged. Therefore, the window for a credible middle power framework is open, precisely because the G7 umbrella has narrowed, and that is the middle power framework that India has to try and create one, in fact. So multi-alignment, which India was focusing on, is now going to become more and more difficult to play that. Which we successfully did in the Russia-Ukraine war, and also in terms of navigating the relationship between the US and China. So this is both a risk and a moment. So whatever is happening in the first two blocks here is a risk and also a moment of opportunity for India, because India is the only country with scale, democratic legitimacy, and credibility with the global South to lead a third standard, but only if it acts. The question no longer is whether to choose, it is when, on what terms, and with whom. Who are the middle powers? We may be able to, we should think in terms of creating a new G7 of middle powers ourselves. But that is the geopolitical backdrop. But what are the challenges we face? I'm going to mention a few of them. India's manufacturing challenge is one. If you look at the merchandise exports, while India has not done too badly, but as I said, it is an incomplete picture to look at only exports, which has grown to 1.8% of world good exports, and Vietnam is at 1.6%. But India has had a longer lead time. It's a much bigger country. And our imports are equally bigger, in fact, even larger than the exports. So in that sense, our trade deficit is a better reflection of India's manufacturing capabilities or the lack thereof, rather than purely looking at the 1.8% of world trade manufactured goods exports as a sign of accomplishment. And you see on the right side, high-tech exports for India and Vietnam. This chart tells its own story. We are not there as a global provider of high-tech goods. In terms of FDI as a percentage of GDP, we have done well compared to our own history. 2015 or so, in 2000, we were at 0.8% of GDP. And then between 2015 and 2023, our FDI as a share of GDP more than doubled to 1.7%. But if you look at countries like Malaysia, which have come down, or for that matter, Thailand, or of course Vietnam, their ability to pull in more FDI is evident in this chart. So given our current account deficit, which this year will be higher because of the ticker price shock that I discussed earlier, we need to do a lot better on attracting FDI in terms of providing tax certainty, tax predictability and continuity, etc., logistics support, making our cities more livable so that the expat population will feel comfortable settling down here, providing them family-friendly environment, including access to international curriculum. All these things matter in terms of making India an attractive FDI destination. Why is this foreign value added as a share of gross exports matters is that is what tells you how far we are plugged into the global value chains. The fact that our share is relatively low shows that we are not plugged into the global value chains as much, but of course we are moving higher. If you look at the chart, since COVID ended, India's ability to attract global high-tech goods and package them and reassemble them and export them, that has gone up. So the chart is trending, the line is trending in the right direction, but we still have a long way to go. Therefore, what does India need? India needs to focus on two tracks at the same time with respect to manufacturing. One is focus on labor-intensive manufacturing, garments, footwear, leather goods, food processing, gems and jewelry. We do have a wage cost advantage. China's technology controls do not matter here. Execution constraint is purely domestic and not external. And we need to concentrate in 8 to 10 states which have a governance capacity. And this track is the one that will create large-scale employment. But this alone will not help us reach, in terms of manufacturing share of gross value added, to 25%. You need the right side as well. The right side is the medium term, which is where the policy intervention like RDIF and ANRF matter. And that is why FTAs matter in terms of competition. This is about semiconductors, batteries, defense electronics, aerospace, specialty chemicals, and so on. And there, the private sector must be willing to source technology from many other sources where we will not be subject to technology control, supply chain weaponization. When you are sourcing goods, it is not enough simply to compare the price quoted in the quotations. Of course, China will do far better. But if you factor in the probability of supply disruptions, then the cost comparisons will change materially. And therefore, we need to think about the long term and not about the next 2 quarters or a few quarters of supply, where one country may have a cost advantage apparently. But if you look deeper, the threat of export controls, supply chain weaponization should propel our industry not only to indigenize, of course, which is desirable, but also to diversify our import sources. Cost premium when you source from countries other than China is real, but it gives you potentially IP ownership, market access, and more importantly, as I said, freedom from coercion. Geopolitical alignment will also be an additional consideration here. And what do we offer in return? Domestic market scale. And we have to make sure in doing these areas, our subsidy focus has to be narrow, strict performance conditionality on our industries, which is what Northeast Asia did very well. Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and in Southeast Asia, only Singapore did that. You basically support domestic industry, but provided the domestic industry becomes export competitive. That should be the criteria. So we need to work on both tracks in order to meet the manufacturing challenge. And the next challenge is the trade skills. This is where the AI impact on labor market comes into the picture. If you look at the left side, what it shows is that you cannot have a manufacturing sector worth 25% of gross value addition at the minimum, which is our aspiration, unless we create a pool of talented and qualified and skilled workers. We are not talking about advanced engineering alone, which we have created enough institutions. But we need to talk about the ITIs and the polytechnics. And electrical, plumbing, carpentry and fitting, mechanical, civil construction, some of these things have become out of fashion, not respectable. But the era when we could wear a suit and a shirt and go and work in steel and glass, air-conditioned buildings is probably history. We need to be able to make our youth treat manufacturing with respect, and trade skills to be made fashionable, acceptable, and also aspirational. This is a task not only for the government but also for the industry. In terms of creating cross-country linkages with other trade bodies, ensuring mutual recognition of standards across countries, and providing the platform for qualified trade skill personnel in their factories and industries. So this is a task where industry has a very big to play, because we will not only be catering to the manufacturing aspirations, we will be making our labor market AI proof. So the AI impact on the IT sector is only a small part of the story. Even though it's important, it occupies the front pages. But the real employment story lies in creating AI-insulated jobs. And that is where trade skills play a very important role, and industry bodies have a big role to play, which I share on the right side. Setting the wage signal appropriately so that it incentivizes the youth to take up these skills. Build structured apprenticeship pipelines across countries and within the country. Champion Indian national trade certification with your counterparts and trade bodies outside India. Invest in ITI modernization directly. Adopt, embrace, fund them, and take them under your wings and create industry ITI polytechnic collaborations. And create role models and viability. In fact, it's not a bad idea to even sponsor a film with one of the popular heroes playing a trade skill person. That is how we make them fashionable and respectable. Which is what in the old Tamil film heroes used to do. Now, if you look at these national priorities, we have to understand that we are doing this in the face of a formidable competitor, which is China. So this involves geopolitical planning as well. China's manufacturing machine is a colossus. It's $1.2 trillion surplus in trade last year, 15% export growth in the first quarter despite uncertainties and conflict. And OECD reckons that China's subsidies are 3 to 9 times the average subsidy given by an OECD country. And China's lead time to acquire new technology, master it, and become a producer is just 6 to 12 months. That is the flying geese paradigm, where Japan led, followed by Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, etc. That where lower cost Asian economies followed a leader, which was Japan, up the value chain, that is closing. Is no longer a flying geese. China now encompasses a whole flock of geese all by itself. That's the reality. So that is the kind of manufacturing competition we face. Interestingly, just in 1 week, week of 13th of April up to 17th, when IMF and the World Bank had their spring meetings, 6 articles appeared in international media, one including our own Mint, 3 articles in the FT, one in Bloomberg, and one in New York Times. All of them had one structural story. China's manufacturing dominance is widening up the value chain across geographies and now backed by legal coercion of supply chains. For example, it notified 2 rules, order number 834, order number 835. I will talk about it in the next slide. 8th of April. It is like Hotel California. We used to say you can check out but not leave. But China made sure that you can neither check out nor leave. And that is what orders 834 and 835 are signaling. It criminalizes information gathering activities related to industrial and supply chains in China. It authorizes exit bans on company employees suspected of helping shift supply chains under foreign pressure. Penalizes any foreign entity that interrupts normal transactions. Vague wording in all these 3 is deliberate so that the uncertainty itself is the enforcement mechanism. This has barely registered in the G7 discussion that took place in the week of April 13 to 17 in Washington, D.C. What these 2 orders, 834 and 835, notified in April by China, what it means is basically these are mirroring American export control, secondary sanctions, and the CHIPS Act style industrial policy. Article 14 brings India directly into scope. PLI, Apple supplier push, and semiconductor mission could all be recast by China as discriminatory restrictions. And therefore sanctions applied on those companies. And these compliances bind also Indian firms in China. Order 835 prohibits companies operating in China obeying foreign directives, which Beijing will label as undue extraterritorial reach. And therefore, India's legal and trade defense response, currently we don't have a blocking statute, we don't have anti-sanctions law, and we don't have the equivalent of America's CIF-US. And that is what I mentioned on the right side. These are our institutional gap. So the window available for us to integrate global value chains into India has become even narrower with what happened on April 8th with the implementation of orders 834 and 835 by China. And then on top of that, we have this issue of buffers, manufacturing buffers that we need to create. Looking at the current energy shock, if you look at both oil and gas together, it constitutes one of the major, probably the major energy shock in the last 40, 50 years. In terms of total global energy supply disrupted, it's about 2%. And it is not only about energy. India also is import dependent on very important metals which are important for advanced manufacturing, battery, storage capacity, etc. Nickel, 100% import dependency, tin almost 100%, and copper 1/3. The world itself will face a copper shortage by 2035, given the requirement of data centers. So it's important that both the private and the public sector think in terms of creating buffers in many of these areas on strategic commodities. And what is strategic is not just restricted to natural resources. It could be fertilizer, it could be active pharma ingredients. So it is like a household in Chennai preparing for cyclones and depressions in winter with candles and food and other supplies and so on, we have to prepare for the next 20 years in terms of boosting our strategic supplies of many of these commodities. And the AI and the employment challenge, I come to that, I spoke about it already, the trade skills, but we are focusing right now only on the first two pillars. How many jobs will be lost to AI in the IT sector? And can we create new jobs with the use of AI in the IT sector? We wrote in July 2024 in the economic survey, India needs 8 million new jobs every year. The IT sector employs 5 to 6 million in total. AI will compress that. But in what time frame? How much will be lost? Net of how many new jobs will be created? It is anybody's guess at the moment. Numbers vary from 10 to 20% over a 5-year period. But it's important to understand that we have to create 8 million jobs a year, and the IT sector employs 5 to 6 million in total. So it is not the centerpiece of India's job creation challenge. The centerpiece is in creating AI-insulated jobs, which is where trade skills matter and industry's role matters. So we need to create AI-insulated jobs at scale. Millions of jobs in sectors AI cannot automate, not only trade skills, but also care economy, allied health, green manufacturing, and sectors which are irreducibly human. Human presence is required, dexterity is required, trust, emotional intelligence, which is where care economy matters, special needs children, culinary skills, hospitality. In all these areas, human touch will be valued, and that is what we need to now. So this is an opportunity to reimagine our education completely. This AI-induced job uncertainty is an opportunity to reimagine education, reimagine pedagogy. If AI is going to write your terms of reference, your essays and your reports and your consultant reports, the quality of the output will come from the kind of questions you pose. So in other words, as we said in the software industry, garbage in, garbage out, the same logic applies in the AI-dominated world as well. The kind of output you get will be richer and usable only if you know what questions to pose. Therefore, our education system should teach our children how to ask the right questions. To be able to ask the right questions or the prompt that you pose in your AI model, you have to read eclectically, widely and broadly. Only then you will be able to write the right kind of prompt. Every prompt should be equivalent to a terms of reference for a committee or a commission. That is when you will get a rich output from the AI model that you use. So in order to be able to teach our children not to memorize formula, but to know enough to ask the right questions, should be the motive of pedagogy and education going forward, starting from school level. It is not enough to teach our children prompt engineering from grade 3. It is important to teach them simply basic writing and reading. To be able to read 8 pages in one sitting, which a quality that has disappeared over the years. So these are the important skills to deal in the world of AI. So in other words, we have to go back to basics. It is not about introducing tablets and AI curriculum from grade 3. So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, I'm coming close to the end of my 40 minutes according to my clock. Maybe it's slightly more, my apologies. So we are confronting the West Asia conflict from a position of macroeconomic resilience and strength. But there are significant risks as the conflict in the Gulf fuses India's long-term imperatives with short-term challenges, which I discussed earlier. Current account deficit management is an important challenge, but the shock is a spur to reprioritize policy aims and fiscal spending. It presents another opportunity for agricultural reforms, given the fertilizer dependence which I talked about earlier, and the speed of decision-making and execution becomes more critical at all levels of government than before. And AI threat for IT majors is a reminder to innovate and enhance competitiveness even in the IT industry. Over the last 30 years, what kind of products that Indian IT industry created that would make it indispensable to the world? That is the question that they need to ask, and hopefully this existential crisis can actually get that question raised and answered. And this is also relevant for India's manufacturing industry, innovating and competitiveness. And AI beckons reimagination of education and traditional skills. And a below normal monsoon forecast is a reminder to all of us on water security and wastewater recycling. In short, FY27 is all about Shreya versus Preya, which I wrote about in the economic survey. Shreya is delayed gratification, Preya is instant gratification. Basically, India now has to invest in the medium to long-term imperatives. It is fine that the world India will be facing in the next 20 years will be not as favorable as China faced between 1990 and 2015, where it was growing from a low middle income country to an upper middle income country. But we can't deal or quarrel with the external condition that will be handed to us. Ultimately, every one of us has to focus on our respective spheres of influence and activity and focus on them. Whether it is encouraging our youth, our workers in trade skills, in exposing ourselves to competitiveness, in innovating, investing in R&D, diversifying our sourcing of goods and services away from China if possible, and not looking at cost from a very narrow perspective, but from a broader perspective. These are all the kind of changes which all of us can make at our levels. If that is the case, then the West Asia conflict will turn out to have been a silver lining and a moment of opportunity for us rather than one of crisis. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much for that brilliant presentation, Chief Economic Advisor. Thank you so much for highlighting the Shreyas and Prayas. Thank you. That's philosophical but very relevant for the current situation, and also bringing to forefront aspects like the manufacturing prowess, how it matters, technology, the role of industries and business in aggregating the R&D funds and supplementing it, and also the factors that are shifting the world order today and what could be our strategic priorities going forward. Thank you so much for that enriching, enlightening talk, sir. Thank you very much. It's a delight to listen to Dr. Anantha Nageswaran. It's going to be a double delight to have a conversation with him. May I now invite Mr. Raghuveer Srinivasan, the Business Line editor, who would be having the conversation with him. And I invite Mr. Vishwanathan to present a customary plan to him and welcome him. Let me take the pleasure of introducing Mr. Raghuveer Srinivasan. As I said, he's the editor of Business Line, as all of you know, and he has over 30 years of experience in journalism with the Hindu Group. He joined Business Line when it was launched in 1994 and was earlier the business editor of the Hindu. He became editor of Business Line in September 2020 and led its redesign and relaunch in 2022 with a clear focus on the economy, markets, and business. He writes regularly, as you all know, on the economy and follows many sectors, including automobiles and energy. He has received the Chevening Scholarship and the Thomas Jefferson Fellowship and has also studied at the University of Westminster. Sir, it is indeed a great pleasure. I will now leave it to you to start the conversation with Dr. Anantha Nageswaran.
Thank you, Ms. Saraswati, and good evening, everyone, and thanks to Mr. Ramkumar Shankar and MCCI for this opportunity to share the stage with the one and only Dr. Anantha Nageswaran. As you must have realized over the last 40 minutes, the depth, the intellectual clarity, and the tour de force that he took us on of the impact of the West Asia conflict on India, it was a masterclass. And it's not easy to interview him. I've been in this position a couple of times before. But it's a pleasure always, and I hope it treats me well over the next half an hour. So, Anant, I would like to start with your important point that you made, that India needs manufacturing depth and capabilities. This government has focused a lot in the last term and this term as well on improving India's manufacturing capabilities with PLI schemes, various other promotional schemes and other things. But yet, we don't seem to be making much progress. Where do you think the pain point lies in this?
No, I think you are right. Efforts, it has not been for want of efforts, it has not been for want of intent. And we can't say that the output or the outcomes are not there. It is probably not there to the extent we would want to see, or maybe things are not happening at the speed with which we would like them to happen. And that could be due to also factors. Some factors could be beyond our control. But in general, I think the reason why the last few years has been exceptionally difficult, and it is not difficult only for India, it's difficult for many countries in the world because, as I said, post-COVID, China, having lost its domestic economy levers like real estate sector, has doubled down on manufacturing, has doubled down on exports, and has basically wanted to establish a pole position in many sectors, leaving no scope for anybody else to be a player in those sectors. So if you look at Thailand, you look at Indonesia, they also face, in fact, much more than India, where we at least have, in real terms, in constant price terms, our manufacturing share of gross value addition has stayed constant at between 17 and 18%. And it is not correct to look at manufacturing share of GVA in current prices because it is subject to the ratio between agriculture and manufacturing in terms of trade. We wrote about it in the economic survey as well. But even if we are at a stable level of 17 to 18%, I did mention the fact that our trade deficit in goods is about 8.5% of GDP, $330 billion, predominantly coming from energy imports. So one of the ways in which we basically will be able to succeed with manufacturing is reducing our energy import dependence, creating buffers in many of the basic metals and resources, and third, equally importantly, making sure that the initiatives such as ANRF and RDF truly succeed in making our industry embrace innovation. And fourth, deregulation, which I spoke about. Ultimately, it's about reducing the cost of doing business. And because this is what makes SMEs competitive and important parts of global value chains when they relocate to India. If you can't make SMEs competitive and cost of compliance still remains very formidable. And the fifth initiative, of course, I would say, is this investment in trade skills. I think if we do that, then I suppose at some point, some of the internal contradictions in China will probably start to show up as well. And their demographics is worsening very rapidly than anybody would have anticipated 5 to 10 years ago. And therefore, we may be able to make more headway in terms of achieving our manufacturing goals. But at the end of the day, as I said in my remarks, our efforts are in our control, but the outcomes are subject to both global and regional factors. So we just have to keep focusing on the initiatives that we need to take.
So you refer to private enterprise investment fleetingly in your presentation. One pain point in the economy in the last 5-8 years is that despite several incentives being given to the private sector, lower taxes, GST cuts, various other incentives, private investment is just not taking off. And we have several industry captains here who represent big businesses in this part of the country. So what is it that you would identify as the reasons for why this hesitation to invest by private enterprise?
No, I think I know that your newspaper has been sort of quite vocal in some sense in writing about it, and I think it's a good debate that Business Line has triggered, and I have written about it in the economic survey as well. And it is true that before coming here, I did take a look at the share of private capital formation in machinery and equipment, etc., or overall gross fixed capital formation, because what India's 32% of GDP, the ratio of gross fixed capital formation under the new series, is still largely driven by the government's investments in infrastructure. And it is not as if the private sector has balance sheet issues this time. Second decade, they had that justification. And the profitability, at least until end of FY25, was very ample, and they have built a lot of internal resources, a cache of internal resources. But if global uncertainties are cited as one reason, then my response to that will be, you have to live with it for the next 2 decades. You're not going to wish that away. And, citing uncertainty as a reason to postpone or not undertake investments, greenfield investments, cannot be a good explanation, because that is something we have to learn to live with. The other thing is, of course, is the China competition, and that's a fair one because many countries are struggling with it, and we have to use a combination of tariff, non-tariff measures and continue to invest in competitiveness from our own perspective. I think it's also the case that some of the third generation, industrial families are not that motivated to be in manufacturing as the previous generations were, and citing many of the, cost of doing business in the country, etc. All of them could be valid, but at the margin, these costs have not become bigger. Governments around the country, not just the union government, have been working on bringing them down, and compared to where they were 2 decades ago, when India was still investing in Indian private sector was still investing, compared to the first decade of the millennium, you can't argue that conditions have become even more onerous than they were at that point in time. So I think our industry also has to kind of, see the writing on the wall, so to speak. If we don't do this, in a world where it is not going to supply us with the goods that we need, at the quantities we need, and when countries, and you saw how China is weaponizing many of its, I think our import dependence and our lack of manufacturing and continued consumption growth will not help us sort of reach the kind of aspiration that we have. So there is a certain soul searching or reflection that is required on the part of the private sector, to put it that way.
Excellent. That's nice to hear from you. While talking about manufacturing, you dwelt extensively on China in your presentation, and very interesting slides on how it's weaponizing its own access to technology and stuff like critical minerals. You also been a very strong proponent that India should ease its trade barriers with China. I think 2 years ago you first broached it in one of your economic surveys.
Investment
barriers. You broached it in one of your economic surveys 2 years ago, and of late there has been some liberalization on that front, though it's not gone the whole way. How do you equate this urge to liberalize investment and trade with China on one hand, and on the other hand, China turning inward? Now, does this?
No, it's not going to be easy. I agree. That's why we feel we need to do a lot more to attract non-Chinese global value chains located in China, which is China plus one approach. But what they are trying to do is to even close that possibility with these orders 834 and 835, which were promulgated about 3 weeks ago and notified by them. They are making that also more difficult, that if once you are inside China, it is going to be difficult for you to leave. So that is the kind of situation they are creating. So, I mean, there are no magic wands or easy solutions here. As long as we do these free trade agreements, because those free trade agreements make India an attractive place of manufacturing, because now India has duty-free access to these markets. As long as we do these free trade agreements, and as long as we continue to invest in manufacturing competitiveness, over time, some windows of opportunity will emerge. We have become part of the Pax Silica framework, and other countries are interested in augmenting India's processing capabilities in rare earths, etc. So my suggestion is that in some sectors where we feel that security element is not that important, we can still look for investment both from China-based manufacturers, but more importantly from foreign manufacturers located in China, and we should continue to pursue that global value chains relocation. And part of that is to continue to make India an attractive investment and livable destination. I think that is the only answer, and then the results will follow even there. But it is not going to be easy because China itself is advising and discouraging many of its own enterprises from relocating or providing India technical know-how or going and investing here in critical areas. They would rather allow their companies to invest in finished goods areas, whether it is in EVs or other consumer durables, but not necessarily in intermediate goods and infrastructure goods, which will give India a sort of a technical know-how. There, they are actively discouraging their companies from investing in India. So it is something that we have to keep plugging away, and at some point, some windows of opportunity will emerge.
I will now take you to a broader macroeconomic question. If ever there was a good time for a crisis, so to say, for India, this is one, because, as you rightly pointed out, our macroeconomic indicators are very strong and very robust in terms of several matrices. But and we are lucky that this is happening at the start of the financial year. It gives you time to recover in case the war stops early. But I want to take you to the worst case scenario. What happens if the war prolongs and this uncertainty goes on, and the good base that you're on will soon be eroded by the first quarter or maybe even before that? So what is the worst case scenario for the economy, not just in terms of growth, in terms of macroeconomic balances, in terms of interest rates, in terms of trade, in terms of current account deficit? Where do you think India will be 6 months from now if the war doesn't stop?
So I think the reason why I didn't give you orders of magnitude is because the financial year has just begun, and the orders of magnitude will be so wide as to be meaningless. I mean, you could talk about a current account deficit that could be higher than 2% of GDP, but how high will it get will depend on one's assumptions about not only the crude oil price, but natural gas supplies, fertilizer prices, etc. So all that we can say is the direction of many of these macro parameters will be in terms of being more negative. So lower growth, higher inflation, potentially higher fiscal deficit, higher current account deficit. Now, it is not a question of whether the conflict is over tomorrow or 3 months or 6 months. It's a question of when the Strait of Hormuz is free and unconditionally open. And when all the production stoppages that have occurred in many Gulf countries in terms of refineries, crude oil production, how soon can they come back on stream? If you look at what the US Energy Information Administration, EIA, puts out, they put out a monthly short-term energy outlook. The last one came out on the 8th of April. What one understands from that is the supply disruption in crude oil will be at least 2 million barrels per day up to end of September. Only in the fourth quarter, assuming that no further damage happens, then in the fourth quarter things become normal, and even more so in calendar year 2027, which is one reason why brokerages like international firms like Goldman Sachs and Citigroup in the last few days have increased their crude oil price projections. So as things stand, I think we are looking at how significant impact. I would like to wait at least until 1 quarter data is available before I am able to give you quantitative answers. Right now we are aware of the ranges with which it will happen, but public speculation on these ranges will be counterproductive, which is why I refrain from giving them.
Understand. You were talking about the monsoon in your presentation as well, predictions of a not too good monsoon this year. And today we ran an report in our paper about fertilizer output being low in the first March and April period of this year compared to the previous year. Though we have enough stocks of fertilizers. Now this combined with a bad monsoon, and these stocks will run out in the Kharif season. And if your output is if you're not able to either increase your output or find sources of imports, where are we going to be in terms of this very important commodity for India's
So
food
two things
security?
I want to clarify. As far as the El Nino Southern Oscillation, ENSO phenomena is concerned, we had a good presentation by Dr. Ravichandran, the Secretary of the Ministry of Earth Sciences, on April 13th, I think. So the good news for India, I mean, I was not calling good news, but relatively less bad news, is that I think the first half of the monsoon season should be okay. The second half will be the problem. Between mid-July to end August will be problematic. But it doesn't sound like India will escape the super El Nino phenomena, because that sets in October. Of course, sometimes things can happen earlier, but right now the super El Nino phenomena is supposed to happen only in...
Our monsoon here is after October.
Northwest monsoon will not be impacted. Northeast monsoon will not be impacted according to him. I had a long conversation with him last week. And then the Indian Ocean dipole will be also working in India's favor, counteracting the effect of El Nino, which is on the Pacific side. And also the fact that we had a below normal snowfall in January to March is actually, usually there is a negative correlation between the snowfall and southwest monsoon. So the fact that we had a relatively lower snowfall, it means there will be some offset coming from that. So how much of this will offset the El Nino phenomena? Obviously we can't say. Right now their expectation is for a below normal monsoon. But as you pointed out, the fertilizer stocks are currently quite ample. Even though we have purchased them, we have placed tenders for at double the price we paid before the conflict began. The stock is available for the Kharif crop. For the Rabi crop, of course, we have enough time, but hopefully by then the situation will have stabilized. And if you look at the global commentary, India is not one of the countries listed as those facing an acute, fertilizer situation. India's fertilizer situation is considered comfortable and safe at the moment.
That's reassuring. I want to also ask you about this. You spoke about the price shock and the supply shock in energy. India has managed both pretty well till now, and prices have not been passed down the line for transportation fuels, petrol, diesel, and largely ATF also. Whatever reasons they may be, you can't have a situation where the oil companies take the burden for a prolonged period of time. Is it good economic policy to not pass down price changes? I know you will not be able to answer this very straight. But as an economist, would you not prefer prices being passed down the line so that consumption adjusts itself and the damage is lesser, rather than keeping price controls and allowing consumption to grow and the damage being taken by some other entities, which will again show up on your fiscal balance sheet in some form?
So I think I would take your question more as an observation than a question. So you have indicated your preference, I would say, and I think it's largely, sound economic logic what you painted. So if one doesn't pass on the prices, what happens is that the burden is taken by OMCs or the fiscal or the fisc, which in turn flows directly into the current account. And as the current account becomes larger, for two reasons: one, fisc takes the burden, and demand is not receiving the price signal of the supply shortage. It is the price that captures the global supply shortage. Even supply is not there and the price signal doesn't signal the supply shortage to the consumers, then that demand compression also doesn't happen. So it becomes a double whammy. So you have a fiscal burden which translates into higher current account, and then you have a lack of demand compression which also translates into a higher current account deficit, because the petroleum product demand will remain high in the absence of price pass through, and you'll be forced to import more at higher prices. So the combined effect on current account deficit will be higher. So that is why we wrote in the monthly economic review that at some point there has to be a better burden sharing between the end users, oil marketing companies, and the fiscal policy. So that is my answer.
That's quite diplomatic. I won't press the point further, knowing your sensitivities. You also spoke to us earlier this week on FDI. One argument that has been often thrown at this government is that you're so foreign investor unfriendly that net FDI is going down. And a lot of Indian investors are actually investing abroad instead of, so you're hit on both sides. Indian companies going abroad to invest and foreign companies not investing in India. But as you rightly pointed out, the data this year is encouraging. But what is it in terms of, is it such a bad thing if Indian companies go out and like Sun Pharma has gone and acquired Organon yesterday? So that's $12 billion outflow of foreign, currency from India. But is it such a bad thing in terms of economic?
No, it's not a bad thing. It all depends on ultimately the devil is in the details or devil is in the data. So if you look at the underlying purpose for which these outflows happen, then some of these outflows are not necessarily for the kind of business acquisition that we are talking about. It is more in terms of financial flows. I think that is not necessarily in India's interest. Otherwise, if Indian companies go and acquire important competitors, important backward integration kind of investments that happen, that's well and good. That should be encouraged. So I think what I mentioned, in my conversation with your newspaper is that we were stuck in a range between 70 to 80 billion dollars at the gross level, and the gross level we have broken out of the threshold, which is a good thing. I think India still has a lot of advantages. I think the important thing is our uncertainty with the US on the trade tariff is over, and we have access to the European markets. I think foreign investors also take note of all of this, and that is why I am encouraged by the fact that February and March have seen large gross FDI inflows. Sorry, January and February. And March is yet to see the data as well. So I think one can see sort of nascent signs of foreign direct investor interest in India returning on the back of these various free trade agreements and the removal of the US tariff uncertainty. And also the Central Board of Direct Taxes has issued an important clarification on 31st of March arising out of the Supreme Court judgment in the case of Tiger Global's Flipkart stake sale. So putting all of these things together, I would think that if India is able to sort of navigate the 26-27 challenges and emerge stronger at the end of it compared to many other nations, then I think the FDI interest will be higher than what we saw in 23, 24 and 24, 25. Yeah,
that brings me to the question on the rupee. Again, I understand the sensitivity
I don't work for the RBI.
But you have been quoted recently saying that the rupee is undervalued. What is the basis of your statement there? And it's in the nervous 90s now, like a test batsman of your. It's stuck there. Will it hit the 100 mark soon?
With the test batsman, you would want them to go to 100, but here in this case, you don't want them to go to 100, right? So that's the only difference. No, I think I think we are definitely undervalued. I look at the real effective exchange rate. I look at the bilateral relative purchasing power parity-based exchange rate of the Indian rupee. Although I can see it from a purely technical perspective, on a bilateral dollar-rupee basis, whether the currency is undervalued or overvalued is very sensitive to your starting point. When you begin the analysis, when does your sample begin? That will give a different answer depending on which year you choose to start your calculations from. But in spite of that, I looked at different starting points. I did come to the conclusion that I think the rupee is oversold and undervalued. And on a real effective exchange rate basis, although it has not reached the levels it reached in 2012-13, it is actually quite competitive than what it was in 2020 when COVID began. So I think, and also from a fundamental perspective, whether you look at the proportion of external debt we carry, short-term, long-term, in terms of foreign exchange reserves, and the fact that we are still generating $860 billion of exports between goods and services put together. So if you look at macro fundamentals, and our growth outlook this year definitely looks at the very minimum, you are going to have a 6 handle in front of the decimal point in 26-27, if not 7, as I mentioned before the conflict began. So if you put these things together, and with some of the valuation analysis that I did, I came to the conclusion that the rupee is attractive at these levels. If somebody has a 3-year or a 5-year horizon sitting abroad, whether he or she is a non-resident Indian or a pure non-resident, I would think that Indian rupee at current levels is a good investment opportunity.
So one last question before I open it up to the audience. This is on Mythos Anthropic's new tool, causing quite a bit of nervousness everywhere, including in the central government. What is your assessment? Is there any assessment that the Finance Ministry has made? I know the Finance Minister held a meeting with banks and the RBI last week, but what is your own assessment of the threat that Mythos has, and how can India handle this?
I mean, I'm not privy to the conversation that the ministry had with the banking system, but clearly the fact that the US Treasury called for an emergency meeting of all the financial institutions and wanted them to check their vulnerabilities immediately, etc., clearly tells us that this is something that where we need to get some licensed copies of this and use them to test our systems and test their resilience, and of course it brooks no delay. Yeah.
Thanks. So we'll have another 10-15 minutes of open house. So please put up your hands, the mic will reach you, and identify yourself before you ask a question. Keep the question brief, and there's a conflict of interest here in the first question. My own colleague, so...
I'll hold back if you want me to.
Yeah, maybe we should give a chance to others. the gentleman there... yeah.
Sir, good evening, sir. Yeah. My name is Murali Chandrasekhar. See, my question to you is, when you are talking about a growth factor or the government infused programs, the subsidies or the benefits, but of late, as what I'm seeing now, most of them are in Hindi names. Names are in Hindi. Even now, whatever you have now talked of, then now the recent one what you talked today is about that ANRF. See, these type of jargons doesn't reach this state, Tamil Nadu especially. In fact, I have been looking out in the net to find out.
So what is the question?
Question is, will there be a way of putting certain things which is understandable by the industry here, or especially the MSME sector? We are not able to understand the schemes, what exactly the government is bringing out.
What are the schemes that?
Bringing out, for example, for MSME, there are certain schemes, but those schemes names itself doesn't gel anything with what exactly as a benefit that this industry can take. So we are totally blank about many of the things, what the government schemes are bringing in. So how some sort of a thing wherein which maybe you can translate that to Tamil and then bring it to us or to English.
So I got it. So what I can do in this case is to take your feedback to the Ministry of MSME. I think there are small industries, corporations, there is the Ministry of MSME within the Tamil Nadu state government as well, and I'm sure they will be able to provide the right information, but nonetheless, I will convey your feedback about the lack of familiarity with many of the schemes that are announced by the union government, that you don't get the information, although I'm not very sure that there is an information pass-through problem here. Some of it should come from the trade bodies, from the local government officials, but at the same time, I will carry your message.
Yeah. Thank you.
So,
The gentleman there at the back.
Sir, very good evening. Firstly, thank you so much. It was a very interesting presentation for all of us to go through, to see that this is what we're eyeing at. And like you mentioned, Shreyas versus Prayas, right? I think for young generation, especially speaking from where I stand, it sets the tone for how we should be looking at the country's growth, how we should be looking at our businesses, our ventures at, and have probably a much longer term vision than just set it for instant gratification, like how you mentioned. My name is Suyash. My dad and I, we represent Grand Magnum. We're an industrial real estate organization. By that, since we're talking about strategic alliances and logistics, warehousing plays an extensive role in the strategy of the country. And we've discussed about multi-modal logistics park. We've discussed about Atmanirbhar Bharat becoming an extensive part of India's growth structure.
What's the question?
What is the question, please?
Sure. So I was just trying to set the context. Given the fact that we are now looking at capital investments, we are looking at infrastructure-based development in the country. If we have to work towards the country's progress, where research and development has to be part of the way we think, if we have to think about how we can become more inclusive with more industries as an industrial real estate player, what would be your strategic direction for us to be thinking in terms of?
I mean, I can't, I mean, I'm the Chief Economic Advisor to Government of India, but I can't unfortunately become a consultant to a specific industry as well at this point. But I think what kind of opportunity that specific company should be looking at, I think in general, I can only speak in general terms. Unfortunately, you know, with this kind of a conversation, I cannot give you specific advice, and I'm not equipped to do that. So, if you look at the 14 PLI areas which we identified, they were naturally based on a certain analysis of what this country would need. So those 14 sectors are clearly growth, important sectors from the nation's point of view. And the second is, if you look at what the ANRF and RDF websites have put up as areas where India is wanting to see both basic and commercial research take place, that also provides you clues as to where one can actually invest in or take a strategic long-term view. And the third dimension is, of course, purely based on conversations with industry bodies or picking up the trends from trade journals, etc. So whether it is in cold chain storage for agricultural products, or whether it is creating buffers on industrial goods and raw materials, and also in labor-intensive manufacturing, given that we are a relatively lower middle-income country, I think India isn't short of opportunities in multiple product areas. Therefore, your choice will depend on your financial resource capabilities and also where your personal interest and passion lies, and what kind of fit it has with respect to your internal capabilities in terms of human resources or management bandwidth, etc. And those kinds of suggestions I can't make from a distance. I'm not sure I answered your question, but this is the best I can do.
Sriram here.
Yeah, this is Sriram here. My question is that does UAE's decision of getting out of OPEC have any impact or any benefit?
It's a very, very preliminary answer. I think at the margin, it's probably not a bad news for India, probably a good news in terms of, because one country can break away from the supply constraints that the cartel usually imposes. And if they wish, and it is not a small supplier, it's not a small producer. Of course, I do not know the extent to which their production facilities have been damaged by the bombs that they endured, by the bombing that they endured. So, but I think at the margin, it is an important development, which I would consider incrementally positive from the Indian standpoint, because it increases our supply optionalities. Yeah.
Yeah. I now have to concede to my colleague Ramesh.
All right, Ramesh. So I'm Raghu's principal disciple. So if I ask a stupid question, it's because of him. Okay. All right. Very quickly, does it bother you the criticism that the decline in the control of fiscal deficit is more because of departments not being able to spend budgeted amounts? We've seen several examples of that.
Which one? I mean, in fact, the capital expenditure, the government has been able to more or less meet its capital expenditure commitments every year, which is why it actually went up from 5.3 trillion rupees. I showed up to, I don't know, the year before, exact number I don't remember. So I think the shortfall in capex has not been there at all, maybe 5 to 6%.
We've seen a few cases, and Mr. Chidambaram also made the point of criticism.
Who made?
Opposition. Basically.
No, I think if I look at, I mean, purely speaking from the point of view of the public capex, I think our actual spend in relation to the budget has been quite good, quite high in the last few years. Otherwise, these numbers won't be showing up.
Okay, and quickly, earlier in your previous conversations, I know from your previous lectures that you held the view that global economy's de-dollarization of global economy was probably not going to happen in a very long time. Is there any change in your position? Is de-dollarization happening faster than anticipated earlier? And if so, how should India react?
No, I still think it's not necessarily happening at the speed many commentators think it is happening. In terms of reserves held by central banks, there has been a decline in the share of dollar, there has been increase in the share of gold, etc. But in terms of commercial transactions in the bond market or forex trading, etc., it is still very much our international fundraisings, it's still very much the dollar. And also if you look at the UAE decision, and then they are looking to the US for a dollar swap, etc., all these things are playing out. So I don't think de-dollarization, if my answer in the previous instance was that it is not as much as people think it is, that answer still remains.
Yeah. The gentleman there at the end with his hand up.
Sorry.
No, at the end there. Yeah, with his hand up. Yeah.
Hi, this is Sanjay Patwari from Bofil Unit Transmission. I will keep my question short. The first one was, you said that is the end of the Western Alliance, the G7. What makes you think it is structural and not cyclical? Because we saw that when Biden came after the previous Trump era, we saw the reversal of the policies. What makes you think that this time around it is structural, it is not cyclical, and we won't go? That is part one. Part two will be, you talked about the trade deals that we have with the Asian countries, Korea, countries like Korea. What economic rationale is there when we are seeing that with the Korea we had tripling of our trade deficit from 5 billion to 15 billion since we signed the treaty with them in 2010. Similarly with other Asian countries, what economic rationale will be there for us to sign trade deals with other low-cost countries? So these are brief two questions.
No, on the first one, in terms of G7, why it is cyclic, why it can't be cyclical but not structural, I'm sure multiple interpretations are possible, but the first Trump administration did not pursue these goals that vigorously in terms of raising defense expenditure or some of the friction points I mentioned in terms of the Ukraine war, etc. So this time the differences have been exposed in multiple areas, and of course it can come back in a post 2029 when there's a new administration, etc. But it's a matter of interpretation. I do see this as a fairly significant difference because it is not opened up in one particular area, it is opened up in multiple areas: political, social, cultural, strategic, security, in many dimensions. For example, the Trump administration has a different view on how to regulate technology companies. Europe has a different view. So it's not only about the defense expenditure part. There are conversations and differences in multiple areas. So therefore my view is that this time it is deeper. Now, I think so the free trade agreement that we made with Korea in 2010, and therefore the trade deficit widened, I think sometimes correlation is not causation. And the Korean companies have a certain manufacturing deep presence, their investment in R&D and innovation. In fact, after Japan, one of the few countries that established a global presence with its brands is Korea. So I think, and in shipbuilding and steel making, etc., they do have capabilities that offer us alternatives to China, and we need to therefore deepen our ties with them and not constrain them, and that is what we are doing.
We have time for one last question.
Yes, here.
The gentleman
Yes.
with the mic there.
Yeah. Excuse me, sir.
Thank you.
No lady has asked a question.
I know.
Yes.
Okay.
Can I go ahead?
I was
There
asking.
are three questions now here. Okay, these are the last three.
Okay.
Maybe I'll come to you after the gentleman there.
Okay. So I am Ramesh Krishnamurthy. Considering the economic resilience that we are talking about, what is your view on the gig economy? gig economy, and do you see any relation with respect to you mentioned about the jobs and technical skill set in the plumbing and electrical sector, right? Electricians and things like that. Do you see a correlation in some going up and one not going up as much? Availability of resources.
I understand the second part of the question. On the gig economy, we have written about it in the economic survey, and I feel that we still don't measure the extent of the gig economy fully. I think it's probably more pervasive because it gives people also optionality and flexibility to undertake multiple roles. So the gig economy has been actually a sort of a stabilizer in the Indian context. But as for second question, I'm not sure I fully understand, but we can take it offline.
Gentlemen.
Yeah. Sorry, my name is Satish. I'm from Modin Thermal Systems. I saw one of your slides which talks about the 4 dimensions of manufacturing challenge, where you are compared Vietnam. But I could see that almost 2.5 times Vietnam is higher than India on high-tech exports. Now, and I could see that the lower FDI intensity in India, and also we can see that the global value chains are very lower compared to Vietnam. But there are certain barriers, structural barriers, which we are seeing that. It's not a question, basically it's my view, but maybe you can tell your views also. But what I could see from those, your presentation and from what I understood is, majority of that, the structural barriers, what we are seeing is, especially on the policy and regulatory reforms.
What is the question, sir?
There is a friction, that's why I said. So I'm just telling my views, and maybe you can...
shorter because we have to wrap up.
Yeah, so policy and regulatory friction is there, and then we also have a labor and land rigidity in the government getting all the approvals. And these are the things which we see that this is a kind of a stumbling block for us. So from the policy intent to the kind of execution, if you do it, I think we can easily, come close to that Vietnam and fill the gap.
Sure, so point taken. Thank you.
The lady, the last question from the lady.
Thanks for your time. My name is Neharika Rajagopalan. My sister and I run a consulting firm called Nivritti Advisory. So you were speaking about strengthening domestic capabilities in manufacturing. So along with that, right now we have the BRSR guidelines, but do you think at the baseline we need to have better and stronger sustainability guidelines? Because right now, even the top 1,000 companies, they start scrambling around for sustainability data, especially the last few of them. So if it's introduced right from the beginning, it could make a lot of sense in terms of the sustainability data. The second thing is, you mentioned the need for improving trade, the skill-based jobs. So I think the major gap there is what students think they could do and what they're actually able to do. So do you think mandating psychometric assessments at a high school level could add value in terms of
I think both these points are well taken. I think I consider them as observations rather than questions. In terms of sustainability data, I don't have a ready-made answer to you, but I'll take your feedback. I think, in terms of aptitude and assessment of student capabilities and interest versus what they are good at, I think naturally one cannot say no to what you said. I mean, I think it would be extremely useful. And that is something that I will take it back with me to Secretary School Education. Thank you.
Thank you, Anant. I think one thing that can be said is this government is a veteran in managing crisis, right? COVID, Ukraine, and now this. So that gives a sense of confidence. And
absolutely, absolutely. I think during COVID time, in fact, India eventually ended up being a better manager of the COVID fallout than many developed countries. And I'm sure this time around it will be no exception. It will be no different.
Nice to hear that. Thanks.
Thank you so very much. That is truly a rich, insightful conversation and a feed to the mind and ears. I usually used to listen to Mr. Anantha Nageswaran. He will end with a Tirukural. I don't know why he didn't do that. So let me say it is Selvathul Chelvam, Sevichelvam, Achelvam, Selvathul Elam Thalai. So we were all fortunate to have that kind of a listening which has enriched our knowledge. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot, Mr. Raghuveer, too. We wish we could have taken more questions. Please pardon us. In the interest of time, we had to restrict the questions, and I request you to stay back for some more time. We are indeed honored to have the presence of Sri T.K. Balaji, the chairman of the Lucas TVS Group. And sir, if you don't mind, on our behalf, I would like to invite you to present a memento and our history book to our chief guest, Mr. Anantha Nageswaran. I request Mr. President Ram Kumar Shankar and Mr. Vishwanathan, Vice President, to join the stage. I request all of you to give a big hand. Thank you so very much, sir. And also, we are happy to have the presence of Mr. Vishnu IAS. Welcome you back, sir, to Tamil Nadu. We are really happy that you are present today. Can I take the same privilege of inviting you to present a memento and the history book of the chamber to Mr. Raghuveer? No, thank you. Thanks for doing that. May I request now Mr. Vishwanathan to propose the vote of thanks.
Chief guest, Dr. Anantha Nageswaran, Chief Economic Advisor, Mr. Raghuveer Srinivasan, Editor Business Line, Mr. Ram Kumar Shankar, President, Madras Chamber, and distinguished guests. In the last 1 month, we've all been wondering where we are heading from where we are in the current scenario. And today, it's been an honor for us to listen to Dr. Anantha Nageswaran's extremely insightful, illuminating, and illustrative presentation. Thank you so much, sir, for enlightening us about the various initiatives, reminding us about the various initiatives that have been taken by the government in the last few years to make Indian industry more competitive, more resilient. You gave us a brilliant SWOT analysis on the Indian economy. And you also talked about how India is relatively better positioned in the current context. In addition to all that you mentioned about why India is well positioned, it's also our good fortune to have such a globally experienced intellectual as the Chief Economic Advisor at this juncture. You reminded us that uncertainty is the order of the world, and we have to learn to live with uncertainty. Finally, we thank you for your valuable words of wisdom on what we as institutions and as individuals need to do in the current context. On behalf of the Chamber, I'd like to thank Mr. Raghuveer Srinivasan for having an engaging conversation with the Chief Economic Advisor and bringing out even some additional nuances in the current situation. I thank the Consul General of Germany and other representatives from consulates and trade offices who were here today. I'd like to thank Mr. Vishnu IAS, Mr. T.K. Balaji, Chairman, Lucas TVS Group, and other captains of the industry, past presidents of the Chamber, governing council members, members of the expert committees, and members of the Madras Chamber, the sponsors for the event, and other invitees. Thank the hotel for the audio-video arrangements and the press who are here today. And finally, I'd like to thank the unsung heroes of the event, which are the employees, the secretariat of the chamber. They are the ones who work tirelessly behind the scenes to make this happen smoothly. Thank you.
जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे
Please stay back, have your lunch break. Dinner. You can have the dinner right now.